Okay, we'll start with, what is your full name?
Lovett Edward Raymond Winchester.
And who were your parents?
Lovett Young Winchester and Mary H. Dowley.
Okay. What was your grandparents' names?
My grandson,
Grandparents.
Charles Edward Winchester and Edith Jane Winchester.
When were you born?
July 30th, 1913,
And where were you born?
Smith's Cove.
Okay. How large was your family when you were growing up?
We were 5 children.
And where did you fit in the family?
I was the second oldest.
Okay. What did your father do for a living?
He was a hotel keeper until the First World War, and then he was invalided home, and after that was a patient in Kentville Sanatorium.
What do you remember about your mother's work day?
Well, only what she said, told us. She worked in the States in a sporting goods factory for a while, and then she came home to Smith's Cove and married my father, and from then on she was just looked after the family. She didn't work out anywhere.
Okay. What was a typical school day like for you?
A school day?
Yeah.
Well, it was the morning hours were 9 to 12 with a recess at 11 for 15 minutes, and then from 1:30 until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And it was all classroom work. And if you didn't have your lessons, you just had to stay in after school.
How would you say the school would look different than a normal school today?
Oh, all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
It was divided into classrooms of approximately 40 to 50 pupils. And in some cases, the room had 2 grades in it, like 4 and 5, as I recall it, and 6 and 7 were together. 8 was separate. But there wasn't the freedom that they exercise in schools today. You were in a classroom under supervision of a teacher, and that's where you stayed.
Is the schoolhouse still standing today?
Yes, it's the one alongside the courthouse.
Okay. How would you have been disciplined in school?
Well, you either minded your P's and Q's or you got a strapping.
And what about at home?
Same thing. If you didn't behave, you didn't conform to things, or if you misbehaved yourself, why, you were punished, physically punished.
What were your daily chores like?
Mine? Well, I suppose from the time I was probably 8 or 10 years old, I had to get the kindling and wood in for firewood. And there was always something to do around the home. One year or two, we burned coal instead of wood, but that meant lugging the coal in and the ashes out. So There was always something to do.
What would you do with your free time after your chores were done?
Studied my lessons, and then probably to bed.
What was your favorite holiday when you were a child?
Well, no specific holiday. The summer holidays were always welcome.
What was it like at your house when the catalog would arrive?
I don't know, dear. I couldn't tell you. I just don't remember, I guess.
Okay. Where else would you get the things that you needed if you wouldn't get them from the catalog?
Well, from your local stores. Clothing. Mine were always made by my mother. Out of my father died when I was 11 years old. And all his clothes were made over, and I wore them. In the summertime, you didn't need shoes. You always went barefoot. And it was only when the frost got on the ground that you put socks and shoes on.
Okay. How much spending money would you have as a child?
None.
None at all?
No.
What was your religion?
Religion?
Yep.
Well, I was brought up Baptist.
So what would Sundays have been at your house?
Well, you're speaking of my childhood now, are you?
Yep.
I was always sent to Sunday school. Always went to Sunday school. And I think it must have been 1928. I was 15 years old, yes, when I was baptized. And when I started going with Mary, her father had a car, and we would go on picnics or swimming parties with proper supervision and all that, you know.
What different things would you grow and raise yourself?
As a child?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Or what would your parents have grown and raised?
Beg pardon?
What would your mother or your father have grown and raised, like vegetables or cattle?
Nothing.
Nothing like that?
No.
What different things would you barter for?
I don't recall any bartering. What we bought, we paid for.
Yeah.
And what we couldn't pay for, we didn't buy.
How much of what you needed would you make yourself?
Well, my mother was a wonderful seamstress, and she made all my clothes and the clothes for the girls until they were... My oldest sister went to college, and then, of course, she had to have what they call store-bought clothes. And and the same with me. I got my first boughten suit when I was 14.
Wow.
The rest of prior to that was all made by my mother.
Do you remember where you got that suit from?
Yes, I think it was T. Eaton's.
Yes. How would you say electricity changed things for you and your family?
Oh, you could go on that subject for hours. When I was young, living in Digby, the electric lights came on at dark, went off at midnight. And when I went to work for the power board, you could get a month's electricity for $1.50.
Wow.
And if you didn't pay it on time, you were charged 10% interest, which made it roughly $1.66 a month for electricity. And today, I think my last power bill was somewhere close to $200 for 2 months. Electricity was not new when I was young, because electricity had been around for a few years prior to that, but everything was done by, all the cooking was done by wood stoves or coal stoves, or eventually oil stoves came in. But they were kind of messy and smelly too. I remember having one, and I wasn't too pleased with it. However, electricity has been a great boon to the country, and it's improved the life of the ordinary family a great deal. Because everything you have today practically runs on electricity.
When did you first get running water?
Well, I don't know when first, but I suppose back before the turn of the century, that is the 20th century, probably around 1880 or 90. In fact, I was just reading a book there, and it's got all that information in it.
Oh, wow.
And I think that's when it was. The picture showed the men digging the reservoir up on top of the hill in Digby. You know where that is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
They piped it in from a lake out near Broad Cove or Culloden.
Okay.
And then they had a reservoir up there. And it was extended year after year, I presume, until everyone had running water. And then eventually, of course, hydrants were put in and for fire protection, and but that would have come, I would imagine, after the 1900.
Okay. Who was the doctor when you were growing up?
Well, there were several doctors here. There was Dr. Dickey, Dr. DeVerney, Dr. McLeave. I think those were the three doctors during my time.
Now, how far away would they have been?
Oh, they were right in downtown Digby. They had their offices there, all of them.
Who delivered the babies in the community?
Well, the doctors. Sometimes I suspect, I'm not sure, but I would imagine that people in the outlying districts perhaps would have a, what do you call them?
Like a midwife, you mean?
Midwife, yeah. They might have a midwife. But very few deliveries were made in the hospitals. They were mostly all at home.
What were some home remedies that would have been used when you were growing up?
Home remedies. Well, let me see. Of course, it was the old basic one, iodine.
What would that have been used for?
Beg pardon?
What would the iodine be used for?
Well, disinfecting cuts or any open wounds or anything of that nature.
Okay.
Sometimes alternate cold and hot compresses were used for croup,
Okay.
and I don't know what they used for measles and not smallpox, but chicken pox. And it seemed that every young person went through that phase. If you didn't have all those little childhood diseases, why, you were lucky. But my mother always, especially in the wintertime, gave us Scott's emulsion.
Okay.
It was a mixture of cod liver oil and other ingredients. And we didn't have too many illnesses as children, really.
How would you have taken care of your teeth?
The teeth?
Yeah.
Well, the same as we do today. We brush them with a toothbrush and toothpaste. But there didn't seem to be the many different types of toothpaste as there is today. There was probably one or two, or three. But oh yeah, your mother was always after you to brush your teeth.
How often would you have seen a dentist?
Only when you had a toothache, I guess, or I don't know. There was no set time like there is today.
Yeah.
You know, today you have an annual appointment, and it's all taken care of at that time. In fact, I just had my annual last week, and I got away without a cavity.
Perfect.
Good.
When someone would die in the community, what would the wake be like?
Well, they didn't have receptions like they do today. That was unheard of, really. The people, the deceased, were taken care of by a mortician, and they had visiting hours, much the same as they do today, and then there would be a funeral service, sometimes held right in the home. And I was talking about one the other day about one that happened out in Cloden, and we went out there. I used to go quite often with the mortician if he needed a hand to help him with the remains.
Yeah.
And that was quite a funeral, a large funeral. The house was packed.
Wow.
And there was as far as I can remember, there was always an ordained minister that took the service, and which was much as it is, same as it is today. Mm-hmm. Except that afterwards, it was only the close friends of the family that perhaps loitered and talked with the bereaved and, sort of consoled them, but there was never, that I remember, any wake or anything of that nature.
Okay. How often would you leave Smith's Cove?
Would I leave?
Yeah.
Well, I left Smith's Cove when I was 4 years old.
Okay.
I started school here at that age. And I moved into Digby when my father bought the hotel in there.
Okay.
And went to school in Digby. Then in 1921, we moved to Kentville and went to school there in the Kings County school system.
Okay.
And then when he died in 1924, we stayed on for a year in Kentville and then moved back to Digby.
Okay.
So it was a bit of a transition from one place to another in a short time.
Right. How would you have gotten to Kentville?
By train.
Was there trains that ran all through around here?
Oh yes, they ran from Yarmouth to Halifax. And sometimes I've known there to be 6 trains a day.
Wow.
It had 2 freight trains and 4 trains that were passengers and baggage and mail. They carried the mail. The service was a lot better in those days, I'll tell you, than it is today. Oh yes, because they'd dropped the mail bags right off at the station, and they stopped at every station all the way through. And but the cars were beginning to take over, of course, around that time. They were, as a youngster, I remember cars. They'd lay them up in the wintertime. They didn't travel in the snow at all because there were no snow plows. And if you had to make an emergency trip, like we made an emergency trip to Yarmouth one winter, we left here at daybreak. We got there at sundown from here to Yarmouth. And we were in the ditch twice, and we were pulled out twice by a yoke of oxen. And cold, miserable day, because cars weren't built for winter travel in those days. They just had side curtains on them. And there was no heaters in them. But you traveled with the buffalo robe over your lap and stayed as warm as you could, but it was still a cold trip.
Now, people have just gotten the rocks and gone up with them to pull you right out, or how did that work?
Fortunately, this was down the French shore, and fortunately we went in the ditch. We couldn't see where the road was. I wasn't driving because I was too young, but my brother-in-law was driving, and you couldn't see where the road was really, except everything was drifted level with snow. The first thing you knew, your front wheels would dip down into the ditch and you'd have it. But each time we were very near a home, and everybody down there had a yoke of cattle. And one family took us in, gave us our dinner, mind you. Pulled the car out, didn't charge us a cent. I don't suppose we had too much to pay for it anyway.
Who would have maintained the roads back then?
Well, they had road supervisors, and Will Franklin was the road supervisor here.
Okay.
But for fire protection, the men had to get out and shovel the roads out. I worked on that as a teenager, time after time after time. Every winter you'd look forward to making a little money, 25 cents an hour, to shovel snow. And any money I ever made up until I was married went to my mother.
Really?
to help with the family expenses. But there were no snow plows. The only plow that I remember back in those days was a man by the name of Robinson, Frank Robinson, had a stable in there just about where Dr. Levesque's office is.
Okay.
Just a little bit north of that, and he had made a plow, and he plowed out the sidewalks. That's about the only maintenance there was. And in the country, you had to get out and shovel the length of your property and more, and then it was credited to your taxes. They didn't pay you anything, but it was against the law to refuse. You could be charged for refusing to get out and shovel.
Wow.
You were taken to court. Unless, of course, you were sick or maimed or otherwise incapable of doing that kind of work. But it was all like on a common level, you see. Money in those days was at a premium. I remember, in fact, somewhere, I have a bill for groceries for my wife, myself, and 2 children for a month for $13. Today, you can lug out $50 worth of groceries in one hand. You know, it's so ridiculous, so far spread that. But we never could afford oranges or fruit and stuff like that in a store. It was the basics, just bread and butter and cereal and potatoes and things like that. In fact, I used to buy my potatoes out here in Smith's Cove. I knew a gentleman there that you could buy a bushel of potatoes for $2.
Wow.
A barrel of apples for $2. I've bought many a barrel of apples for $2, mind you. Today you get 5 pounds for $3.
Isn't that something?
Oh yes, terrific.
What did you expect to do when you grew up? When you were younger, what did you think you wanted to do when you grew up?
I wanted to be a doctor, but my mother never had enough money to go to college. I left school when I was 15 years old on a Friday, and I went to work Monday morning.
Was that the reason why you left school, was to start working? Or?
I had to, yes. And I went to work on the Pines Hotel, building that. And from then on, it was just work, work, work. I thought for a while I might take up the plumbing trade. I worked as a plumber's helper for 2.5 to 3 years with a firm from Halifax. I went down to Yarmouth and worked on the Lakeside Inn, which now is a Catholic home. I think, do you know what it is? Head of Lake Milo there? That great big stucco building,
Okay, yeah,
sitting
yeah.
back? That was a hotel
Okay.
originally. And then I came back and worked on the helps quarters, the new helps quarters at the Pines. Well, then after those jobs were finished, I think the first or second year that I was married, I made a living by washing windows and mowing lawns and things like that. And then finally I was hired by the Digby County Power Board. And I worked there from, I think it was 1934-35 until war broke out. Then I enlisted in the Army.
How dangerous would your work have been, your first job working at the Pines?
How, what?
Dangerous? When you were
Dangerous?
working
Well, I think if you used your common sense, there was no danger to it, but it was, in a sense, dangerous. You used to use these lead pots. There were nothing like these, what they call the ABS pipes and things like that. You had to cork every joint and then pour the joint full of lead. And if you dropped any water in that lead pot, it would explode.
Okay.
You had to be very, very careful that way. And on one occasion, I don't know how this happened, but we had a shed there where we used to keep the supplies in, quite a large building, and especially oakum that we used to cork joints. And the oakum, pile of oakum got a fire one day, but they got it out before it got out of control. Fortunately, there were one or two fellows in the building at the time, and I don't know how it happened really. But there wasn't a great deal of danger other than, well, if you dropped a length of pipe on your foot, well, of course that was dangerous. But I don't think anyone ever did that.
As a teen, what kinds of things would you do for fun?
Well, I was always athletic. I played hockey. I played with the old Digby Ravens.
Okay.
I'm the only one left alive of that team.
Are you really?
Yes.
Wow.
I played baseball. And I used to do track work, running.
Okay.
And one year they used to hold the high school track meets in Acadia.
Okay.
And one year I won the Nova Scotia Championship for the 220.
Good for you. Wow.
So I think I went up there on 3 occasions. You ever heard tell of Earl Anderson? Well, Earl Anderson was a very athletic, and he was a doctor. He was a cousin of mine. And one year he and I, just the two of us, tied the Kentville team. They had 17 men on it. We tied them for 3rd place.
Just the two of you?
Just the two of us.
Oh my goodness.
Well, we went into everything, the dashes. I won a lot of the dashes. And but that 220, that was my fond memory, because I was racing against a fellow from Halifax and about 3 or 4 others in the finals. And the first time that we ran the finals, this fellow from Halifax and I were running neck and neck, and he moved over into a lane and I moved over with him, and it was called off. We weren't allowed. They didn't allow a winner.
Oh, okay.
So after about a half an hour, I guess, we had to rerun it,
Okay.
and I beat him.
Good for you.
But that was something I enjoyed.
So would you say sports were a big part of school back then, or?
Well, a big part with me, not the school itself, but we represented the school. On one occasion, I went to play with the Digby Ravens when I was still in high school.
Okay.
I was only about 15 years old. And on one occasion during the winter, they must have got their schedule mixed up because they had 2 games on on one night. So they asked us if we could get a team up from the high school and go up to Bridgetown and play them,
Okay.
just to fill in the league game, which we did, and we beat them.
Oh, good.
A bunch of kids, you know. But we had some good skaters. There was a lot of good hockey players here in this area. But they're all gone now.
Who were your screen idols when you were growing up?
Oh boy, Tom Mix, Hoot Gibson, all those old westerns.
Okay. And what kinds of music would you like?
Music?
Yeah.
Well, I had a preference for military band music.
Okay.
I played in a band for 25 years,
Okay.
and on one occasion when I was living in St. John, I was a member of 3 different bands, and it kept me busy.
I guess. What different things do you remember about dating?
Dating?
Yes.
I don't really know, dear. I met my wife in school, grade 9,
Okay.
and we've been going together ever since.
Wow.
We just celebrated our 69th wedding anniversary.
Congratulations. Wow.
See all the cards?
Oh my. Wow. All time.
Yeah,
Well, that's wonderful.
yeah.
How did you meet your wife?
In school,
Okay. And how old were you when you got married?
I was 18.
What do you remember about your wedding?
I remember it very well. We were married in the Trinity Anglican Church on November the 16th, 1931. And my brother-in-law-to-be was my best man, and the witnesses were her father and mother. And the minister's name was Mr. Gabriel. I had no money to pay the minister, which was a normal thing in those days. My father-in-law gave me $5. I gave it to the minister, and the minister gave it back to my wife. That was our wedding present. So I remember it quite clearly.
Would you have gone on a honeymoon?
No.
Once you were married, where did you live?
The first winter I lived in my mother was then running the hotel that my father had bought,
Okay.
and we had a 2-room apartment up on the 3rd floor. That was the first winter. And then in the spring I rented a place. Do you know where the old funeral home used to be there on the corner of Queen Street and Warwick? You know the garage there?
Yep.
You know that large building right in back of it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's where I rented. The ceilings were about, I was going to say 90 feet high, but I think they were 12-foot ceilings.
Wow.
We couldn't furnish them, couldn't begin. Well, we used 2 rooms out of that whole house, and I paid $15 a month rent. We had orange crates for stools, and my father-in-law gave us a table and 4 chairs, and we had a little two burner hot plate which we did our cooking on. And then eventually I moved from there to another place, and then from there to where the museum is. Do you know that?
Yeah, I do.
That's where my daughter was born, my oldest daughter.
Oh, okay.
And that was 1935. And yeah, that's the year I went to work for the Power Board, 1935.
The motel that your father had bought and your mother kept
What?
it up.
What,
The
dear?
motel, did you say your father had bought a motel?
Yes.
Was that around here?
Yeah, oh, yes.
What was the name of that place?
It was the Winchester Hotel. And it was right down at the head of the wharf.
Okay.
You know where Maiden Lane is?
Yeah,
You know that parking lot where those cars park?
okay.
That's where the hotel was.
So when your father passed away, your mother took it over, did she?
Well, yes, he died in 24, and mother came home in 25 and took over the hotel.
So would you have stayed there at the motel, or did she just go there during the day and then come back? Or
Oh, no, she stayed right there all the time. She was the cook. And I tended office for her, and my older sister waited on tables. And then my two younger sisters and brother were too young to participate in any work. But and then, of course, after I was married and spent the first winter there,
Yeah.
why I moved out, went on my own. Well, then she built that house where Bernard Daly lives.
Okay.
You know Bernard?
No, I don't, but one of the ladies
It's
is.
the one right on the corner.
Okay.
Well, you call it a bungalow, but it's a 12-room house.
Wow.
And she built that, and during the war, or when I enlisted, we were living there. And sometime during the war, my wife moved out to the Lighthouse Road. I don't know why, but whether she didn't get along with my mother or what, I don't know. But anyway, mother was a hard worker, hard worker. She lived to 92
Wow.
before she died.
What do you remember about tourists coming?
Tourists?
Mm.
Oh. Well, I used to tend the train and the boat, canvass for the hotel. And we didn't have too many tourists because we had no place like for a tennis court or
Okay.
a swimming pool. We catered more to the commercial trade, the commercial travelers.
Okay.
They traveled on the road all the time with these great big high trunks. And we had what they call sample rooms where they used to rent the sample room and display their wares, and then the merchants would go in and see what was there, and
Okay.
and then give them an order for what they wanted.
Okay.
It was an altogether different thing. But as far as the tourists were concerned, they didn't know anything about Nova Scotia. I've seen them come off of the train carrying skis in the middle of the summer. No, it's true. They thought they were coming north, and that was all they had in their mind was, we're going north to the land of snow. And they knew nothing about it, but I found the majority of them were very nice. Many of them had permanent homes here in this area, especially down here at Harbor View. All those cottages down there were filled. And they liked the rural areas because most of them were from the city, where it was nothing but noise and confusion, and they'd like to get away from it for the summer. There was one gentleman, do you know where Charlie Halliburton lives? Well, he lives down the south end of town. You know where that big building is, the old Lower Lodge Hotel?
Yeah.
Okay, well, Charlie lives up just a little bit this way on the opposite side of the street.
Okay.
And there was a fellow, an American, used to come to, owned that place, and he played the organ in Trinity Church. His name was Channing LaFay, and he, all summer long he would play, and he was a wonderful organist. I think he played in one of the churches in New York City, and of course he did this for nothing. But as a rule, I found most of the tours very, very nice.
What do you remember about the Depression?
Well, that could take years to tell you about the Depression. It was pretty rough going. Nothing was ever thrown out. Nothing. Not even string. And I say that sincerely. And I can remember when I would go home from school and have my supper and didn't feel much like eating it, and my mother would say, "Eat that up, Raymond. Don't let the Germans have it." See, we were at war with the Germans, and that was the First World War, and she'd say, "Don't let the Germans get it." And boys, we ate it up. There wasn't a morsel left, but we were quite fortunate in a way. When I was in Kentville, I sold papers, the Halifax Herald, which is now the Chronicle Herald, for 3 cents a copy, and I got 1 cent commission. And I had 25 customers, so that was 25 cents a day that I would make. They were steady. I didn't have to go out on the street and sell them. I delivered them right to their place of work.
Okay.
And I would do that on my noon hour every day. And then run home, get my lunch, back to school. And then on Saturdays I would collect the money. And I would keep my portion. The rest was mailed into Halifax. And all that money went to my mother because we were very poor. There was no two ways about it. On one occasion, just prior to that, when I was about 9 years old, we were evicted from our lodgings for not being able to pay the rent. And all they allowed us to take was the stove, a table and 4 chairs, and 4 mattresses. No beds, just mattresses. And I remember sleeping with my sisters on a mattress on the floor. And my mother was ill, my father was in the hospital, and I used to get up mornings and Mother taught me how to make porridge. And I would make a great big pot of porridge for the kids and myself, and then off to school. And then when we moved downtown at Kentville, at that time we were up on the far eastern end of the town called Wickwires Hill. When we moved down into the town, my father died there. And he was a pensioner. And the government cut off the pension. He was getting $110 a month for a wife and 5 children. And they cut off his pension, and it was the best part of 2 years before J.L. Ilsley, who was at one time a lawyer in Kentville, got it reinstated. So every penny that I could earn, I'd get up in the morning and take a herd of cows to pasture for the next door neighbor. And I got 50 cents a week for doing that. I sold papers on the street. And one summer in particular, my sister and I picked strawberries for a cent a box. And if we could pick 100 boxes, we were both tickled to death because it was $1 each a day. And they'd come into town, and a truck would come in from the farm, pick us up at 5 o'clock in the morning. We'd go out and pick till noon. And the old fellow there provided the tea in a great big cauldron. I can remember this big iron pot. And what were our sandwiches? Strawberry sandwiches. I ate so many strawberries that year, I didn't want to look one in the face again.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, that's true. We could buy the bread, and the old fellow used to, we carried our lunches in these lard kettles. They were a tin kettle, you know, made excellent for lunches.
Yeah.
And Mother would make up sandwiches, which were strawberry sandwiches for both my sister and I. And that's what we ate for our lunch. Then at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we'd knock off. And if we could pick 100 boxes a day, each of it, we were lucky.
Wow.
Then they'd drive us back into Kentville, and we'd disperse at a dispersal point. But it was a long, hard day for kids, you know. I was only about 9 or 10 years old at that time. But I don't know, it taught us something. We were very frugal.
Right.
Not mean or tight, but frugal. And of course, if you could steal something without the fear of getting caught, you always did that, I must admit. It wasn't a very good practice, but but that's what we did.
Now, would you say the majority of the kids when you were younger would have worked hard like you did all the time, or were you an exception?
Well, those that were in financial straits like we were, they worked all the time. Because it'd be 20 or 25 of those kids going out picking strawberries. And I used to go over there. There was a couple of elderly maiden ladies who had a lovely big home there right where the Cornwallis Inn is built.
Okay.
Do you know where that is? They were the Mrs. Webster, two sisters. And I would go over there and work in their garden for them for a day, like a Saturday. And the only pay I got was a chance to play a game of tennis on the lawn. That's what they paid me. Never paid me a cent. But they were sort of neighbors. We lived right catty-cornered, right across from that. There was I think there's an Esso service station there now. And the building that we lived in, where my father died, was McDonald's Motors.
Okay.
They occupied the whole lower floor of the building, and we had the second floor where we lived. And there was another story above that where another couple lived, a middle-aged couple. But I don't know whether there were any of the better or any of the worse for it all.
What memories do you have of wartime?
Well, that's very vivid. Wartime was. I was working in Digby on the Front Street. Am I going into too much detail?
Of course not, no.
Right alongside of the jewelry store there, the Fancy's jewelry store,
Okay.
there was a bakery being set up by Mr. Smith, a different type of building that's there now.
Okay.
And I was installing the lights, the hookup there for the lights, and war had just broken out. Canada had just declared war. And the recruiting officer came along and stopped. I was up on a ladder. He said, "How about going to Bridgewater with me?" That was a training center. I said, "Oh, I don't know, Pete." I said, "Why don't you come over to the house for dinner and we'll talk it over." So he came over and had dinner with us, and we talked. We were then living where Bernard Daly lives, that house on the corner of Maiden Lane.
Okay, yeah.
And I was renting it from my mother. I was paying her rent for that. So he came over and we discussed it, and of course my wife wasn't too pleased about it. I said, "I'll let you know tomorrow." So I called up her father, and he came down, and I explained it to him, and he said, "Well, it would be the last thing that I would ever suggest to you. Wait till spring." He said, "Because they're not prepared. They don't have any training methods worked out. They don't have any uniforms. They don't have any of this. They don't have any of that." He said, "You might just as well spend the winter home where it's comfortable. They've got no barracks for you." So I took his advice. I said, "Okay." So about a month maybe later, I came in from work one day, and my boss said to me, "This gentleman wants to see you," and he was up at a house there that was situated where the Masonic Hall is now,
Okay.
on Queen and Mount, King and Mount. So I went up to see him, and he was a recruiting officer from Halifax, and he wanted linemen. So I talked with him for a while, and I said, "Well, I'm not going to sign up now, but I'll come in April," which I did. I went in April of 1940, signed up, went up to the barracks, and I spent a year or two in Halifax, and I rose quite quickly in the ranks. Most of my paraphernalia, in fact, is in the museum. I took it down for the war exhibit.
Okay.
And eventually I got off the line altogether. I did line work for about 2 years. And I came in from work one afternoon. I was a sergeant then. And I came in from work, and the sergeant major, I was eating my supper, and the sergeant major came into the mess hall, and he said, "The OC, that's the officer commanding, wants to see you right away." So I got up, left my supper, went into the office. And the only thing he said to me, he said, "Do you think you could handle a company?" I said, "You mean as company sergeant major?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Yes, sir, I can." So the next day I was company sergeant major. And then about a year and a half or 2 years later, I had the choice of taking a commission or going to the rank of WO1, which is a very, very cushy position. So I took that. I didn't go for my commission because I was the top of the non-commissioned officers.
Okay.
I didn't have to buy any clothes or pay any mess dues, and even then, money was the root of all that made my decisions. See, when I joined up, I was getting $90 a month, of which $78 a month went to my wife. It was assigned pay. All I got was $12 a month. And even with that, I sent an extra $5 home to my wife. But by the time I got through, I was getting $5 a day because I was getting Class A trades pay plus rank pay, which was $150 a month, which was a big step up from 90. That's why I took the W01 instead of the second lieutenant. As I say, money was the decision maker. But I spent 5.5 years in the Army, and I have very fond memories of it. I met a lot of fellows. I have a picture in there at the museum now of our first line crew, and they're all dead. I'm the only one living. And that's the way with everything, I guess.
So it obviously then wasn't mandatory for you to enlist. If you were asked, you didn't have to
No.
go if you didn't want to.
No, you see, I would have exemption for two reasons: a married man, and my work, which of course was essential too.
Okay.
But no, I was quite pleased. I have always been glad that I enlisted voluntarily, because well, for several reasons. I had a very, very close friend who never enlisted in my... He could have. He didn't have the responsibilities that I had, and he didn't have what do you call a type of job that would exempt him from military service. So nothing, of course, was ever said between us because we were friends, but I always thought that he should have enlisted voluntarily. But I had a nice time. I stayed in Halifax for the first 2 years, 1942, before I was transferred out. And in 43, in 42, the latter part of 42, I was transferred down to Sydney. I liked it down there very much. And then in 43, I was in W01. No, not 43. I was W02, Sergeant Major. I took a draft of 18 men out to British Columbia, and we worked there on lines, getting the communications built up. And by the time I left there, I had more men under my direction than was on the company payroll.
Wow.
The company is formed of 120 men and officers. I had 132 men, and they were situated over a 50-mile area, and I walked that every week. I had 5 camps out there with these 132 men in them, spread out over the territory, and I enjoyed that very much. Always good. There was good fishing,
Yeah.
good hunting, and then in the 1st of January, 44, my wife and children arrived out there.
Oh, wow.
I went down and asked the colonel how long he thought that I would be there. He says, "You can stay here till the war ends if you want to." Well, I said, "In that case, I'll bring my family out." That was January, and in March, 18th of March, I was shipped back to Halifax.
Oh, my goodness.
Isn't that something?
Wow.
I never forgave them for that, because she landed there with 3 children, mind you, from Digby to Vancouver. I went down. I was up on the island on on Vancouver Island. I come down on a duty boat and met her at Vancouver Station. They had two cases of chicken pox. Two of the children were down with chicken pox, and she had a case of blood poisoning, and she was a wreck. I said to her, "You look as though you've been dragged through a knothole." And she says, "Well, you try it sometime," she said. Anyway, I got them back to, we were at Camel River at the old Willows Hotel. And that was just a little place not much bigger than Smith's Cove.
Okay.
But it was right at the end of the road. There was no road beyond that.
Okay.
I think it was around 170 miles north of Victoria. And we had a double rooms in the hotel, 2 rooms with a private bath and that. It was very comfortable, except the health officer landed there and took the 2 children up to the Lourdes Hospital. It was up over the hill. So that was, I think, my oldest girl and my young son. He was about 3 or 4 years old. He's just beginning to talk a little bit, you know. So when I took him up there, I said to him, "Now, you look after Ray, won't you?" He shook his head, yes. I said, "Make sure she doesn't cry." You know, I said, "You're in charge here now." And well, they were there about 10 days, I guess, 10 or 12 days, or whatever time it took to get over the contagious period. But I liked it very much. And then towards the end of it, I was appointed to the instructional cadre for the 6th Division, which was going to the Pacific. I didn't like that. I didn't like it at all. I knew damn well if I went, I'd never come back.
Yeah.
Because that was awful dirty fighting over there. However, I never felt that way about here. Even when I was in England, I didn't have any compunction about being killed by air raid or things of that nature. But I didn't like it there, and I went down to Missouri, and I was there until September, and of course by that time the Japs had surrendered. So then we came back to Canada and to Petawawa, and then from there I got discharged around the latter part of October of 1945. Then I had to go back to hospital the first of the year in 46 for an operation, and I got that over with and took up with my old job at $145 a month, on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I couldn't support my family. It was less money than I was making in the Army. So this same friend of mine was with the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company, and he offered me a job. He says, "I'll guarantee, Bud," that's my nickname, Bud.
Okay.
He says, "I'll guarantee, Bud," he says, "that in the first full year you have with the company, your earnings will be around $5,000. I said, "You're kidding." And he says, "No, I guarantee it." So I left the power board. I went over to St. John in October of 46. And I couldn't find accommodations for the family until the spring of '47. And in 1947, my income was over $5,000. But I worked 18 hours a day, every day of the week except Sunday. And eventually I rose to assistant manager in the company. So about that time, my wife and I had always been talking about a motel. We'd like to build a motel.
Yeah.
So by that time I was in my mid-40s. I said, now, if we're going to do anything about it, we've got to do it now, because another two or 3 years, we're going to be too old to run any motel. Well, we did. We built a motel. And in 1958, July of '58, we opened the motel, 10 units, of which only four were completed. And that winter I worked on the other 6 and got them all done. Struck up a deal with T. Eaton Company in Moncton, and got the other 6 furnished. And then about 3 or 4 years later I added another 10, which gave me a 20-unit motel. And for 8 years we never had a holiday. Never went anywhere, never did a thing, my wife and I. We ran the motel, we made the beds, we cleaned and swept and worked our heads off.
Wow.
And until at last, at the 11th year, I said to her, I've either got to change my mind or sell the motel. So I advertised it for sale, and it wasn't long before I had a fellow who bought it. In 1968 I sold it and came home. So that was about the... I liked it very much. I had a lovely place there.
Yeah.
I was in to see the present owners. It's changed hands, I think, about at least 4 times, maybe
really?
maybe 5. And this chap was a middle-aged man with just him and his wife, French couple, and
Would you mind if I turn the
no, sure, if you can stand it, sure thing.
Thank you.
And they wouldn't believe me when I told them that the first people that we had in there, we charged them $5 a night.
Wow.
$5 a night, can you imagine it? Today you can't get one for $75.
Oh, you're right.
That's terrible. But the fellow I sold it to, of course my rates went up after that, after I got the 10 units going, and I was filled every night all summer long. Wasn't a night that... In fact, sometimes we even took in people and let them use our room. We slept down cellar. And it was a hard go, but my nerves kind of gave out on me. I would, if a fellow said, well, I only paid $12 night before last, I would simply say, well, go back to where you were then. You know, you couldn't say that to the public,
Right.
because after all, you just ruin your own business, and the word spreads pretty fast.
You're right.
And I knew it, so that's why I said they've either got to change my attitude or sell the place. But it worked out quite well, and in fact, it worked out very well. And but I've often wanted to be back there.
Yeah.
You know, it was a lovely, lovely spot. I bought the land there, 190 some odd acres, for $2,000.
Wow.
Isn't that something? Hard to believe. But hindsight, they say, is better than foresight, and I guess it is.
Describe to me what Smith's Cove would have looked like when you were grown up.
Well, it hasn't changed a great deal with the exception of newer houses. I used to spend my summers with my grandfather who lived down here on the point. And he tended the railway bridge for a good number of years. And when I first went to school, I used to walk from up here to the school, which was way down by, well, beyond the post office.
Okay.
Quite about 2 miles. I was 4 years old when I started, but it didn't hurt me. And then my uncle owned a farm just not too far from here, and I spent a summer or two with him. I think Mother sort of farmed us out, you know, when things were tough. Why, there was one less mouth to feed, and I always came to my grandfather's or to my Uncle Jerry. And I loved it on the farm. I thought, boy, this is going to be the life for me, you know, but never materialized, which is probably just as well.
How superstitious would you say people were when you were growing up?
Well, people...
Superstitious.
Well, there was a bit of superstition around. But I don't know that it ever affected us or ever entered our home. Mother, I think, I don't know just how to say it, but she had a brother who was drowned in Salmon River years ago. And she said that one night he came and stood by her bed and told her not to cry, that he was all right. Now, sometimes a person's mind will do things like that, you know. To her, it was very real, though. And but I've never been very superstitious. My dad was anti-superstitious. He said 13 was his lucky number.
How would you compare life in general today to days gone by?
Well, dear, it's altogether different. Absolutely altogether different. Nobody walks anymore. They travel by car or bicycle, and not many bicycles, mostly all cars. Their food is all prepared for them. They can walk into any store and have a meal just by buying the stuff that's cooked there. They really don't have to work. Nothing like we used to do. I worked on the town sewer system one summer when they were putting in new sewer lines down the front street. This was before the main street was paved.
Okay.
And we were paid 25 cents an hour for digging with a pick and a shovel. And we had to pay to have our own pick sharpened.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, sure. And that happened about every week. We'd have to pay 25 cents to have our pick sharpened.
Imagine.
Yeah. And it was a back-breaking job. It was tough going. Then in 1935, why they paved the front street there, or well, they paved from Yarmouth to Halifax. Actually, there was all dirt roads before that. But I can remember when I used to run behind the water cart that would go up this front street and sprinkle water. It would spray water out, you know, and cover the whole street
Yeah.
to keep the dust down. I had my bathing suit on, and I'd run behind it and get wet, you know.
Okay.
And we used to swim off of the wharfs there, right in the basin. And one year, this friend of mine and his brother and I, we made a pact. We said we'll go in fishing, or not fishing, we're going swimming every day until the hunting season starts. And the hunting season started the 1st of October. And we did, right off of, you know where Joe Casey's building is there, Juco?
Okay, yeah.
There used to be 2 wharves there. We used this one on this side. And we had a diving board on the end of the wharf. And of course you had to go when the tide was in. And I went every day.
Wow.
Every day. And it was cold at first, but after that you got really accustomed to it, you know? You didn't mind it at all. In fact, it felt so invigorating. And as kids, we used to spear flounders down there. And over on the maritime wharfs, we used to catch flounders, and the maritime fish bought them from us for $1 apiece.
Oh my goodness.
You know,
Wow.
so we have nice big flounders, you know, about like that. Sometimes this big. And smelt fishing, oh, it was terrific. You could get down there in the summertime and half an hour have all the smelt you could eat. And we used to go to a swimming hole that we called the Great, but it's extinct now. They built the road on Victoria. You know where Victoria Street is?
Yeah.
That goes out to the wharf, and as you get down there, where that sort of campground is on the right,
Yeah.
just this side of it, on the opposite side of the road, used to be the swimming hole,
Okay.
and it was beautiful there. Oh, it was gorgeous. Kids go down there. We'd never wore a bathing suit, and we'd build a fire,
Yeah.
great big fire, enough to roast an ox, and go swimming. And the water was just like milk, coming in over the flats and up the brook, you know. And then when the tide was low or out, there was a hole there on the Racket Bridge. We used to swim there. You'd dive off the railing, and they drowned cats in there and everything else. That didn't bother us. Didn't bother us at all. We still went swimming there. Oh my!
Could you just tell me your wife's full name just before I shut everything off?
Mary Jeanette.
And how many children did your family have, you and your wife?
We have 3.
3.
Yeah.